Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Ryan Heckman, the CEO of Rallyday Partners, and this is the Founders Journey podcast. We'll explore the heart and soul of great founders and their journey to build the company of their dreams. You will learn about new industries and business models while discovering how to apply the founder's mindset to your everyday work and life. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Founders Journey podcast brought to you by Rallyday Partners. I'm Ryan Heckman, and today I'm joined by Frank Corvino, the co-founder of Genesis Research. Frank and I have been looking forward to this conversation for some time for a couple of reasons. One, Frank and his business partner, Steve Arikian, started Genesis about 15 years ago, and today is widely considered the worldwide leader in providing real-world evidence, quite a mouthful, to pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies globally. So it's been a huge business success, but more importantly, it was Rallyday Partners' first portfolio company in our first fund. As if that wasn't special enough, Frank also just joined Rallyday Partners as our next managing partner a couple weeks ago. And so Frank and I, as well as the rest of the Rallyday team, are starting a new chapter together, building the Rallyday platform in service to founders building their businesses. And I just couldn't be more proud to be welcoming Frank to the podcast. He's got an incredible story you're going to enjoy, and we are going to have a blast. Welcome, Frank.
Hey, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
I guess we might as well start at the beginning. You know, something that maybe our listeners should know before you tell us your story is just how far you have come and how quickly you did so. I think for me, at least, it's even more stunning that this is not like a tech business. This is what could be considered kind of an old school business that Frank has turned into a very powerful platform, but it's not as if this is a tech business from Silicon Valley, you know? So it's just an incredible story. I think it's also a story about what might be deemed an overnight success 15 years in the making. You know, like a lot of founders, he slogged it out for a good, 10 years before getting an equity partner. And then all of a sudden he hit the gas, and with the power of catalytic capital really has transformed his organization and in so many different ways. And I think for any entrepreneur out there that might be in year 8 of those 10 years or slogging their way through, this might be inspirational to you. And it certainly is to me. So Frank, overnight success, 15 years in the making. Why don't you take us back to that moment where, the stars either lined up or you lined up the stars that you can look back on and say, yeah, that was a really pivotal moment on this journey.
Yeah, Ryan. So one thing comes to mind. Picture this. I'm a young, broke, ambitious kid with a chip on his shoulder and an entrepreneurial side hustle that could change my life. We have no clients, no employees, no office, but we're grinding. And we needed a place to work. So we hopped around from one deli to the next in Hoboken with our brand new MacBooks in tow. And my day-to-day life felt like an endless stream of unsuccessful pitches. And I began to question if this consulting path was a viable one for me. But one morning, everything changed. My partner, Steve, drove up that morning with a calm smile and told me that a top 5 pharma company heard that we do healthcare data analytics and wanted to schedule an in-person site visit for the following week at our office that didn't exist. So I didn't know whether to celebrate that we got a second take or just to dig a hole for myself at that point. But that's when I thought, what if this was our moment to get our business off the ground? What if we were able to pull off a successful site visit? It was a huge opportunity, and we'd worked way too hard to let us pass it by. And we had 1 week to pull it off. And, I don't know who reads Stoics and Ryan Holiday, but this is a true example of the obstacle is the way. So in 2 days, we found a vacant furnished office in Hoboken, beautiful place that we could rent for the month. In 4 days, we had our signage up. bought at Restoration Hardware, family pictures, and all necessary AV equipment to host the meeting. In 6 days, we had our experts and scientists that we'd be working with on this engagement committed to the meeting. And finally, the day before the meeting, we needed bodies. So we propositioned our local bartender to pose as our receptionist. And I brought 20 former students from Stevens Institute of Technology to pretend like they were working at our stable yet growing company. And so on the morning of the meeting, about 15 minutes before our clients arrived, I walked through the office, and what I saw was dozens of people looking busy, complete with the receptionist. In the conference room was a room full of scientists, physicians, and analysts ready to talk shop, and the office was buzzing. But I was calm. And it was that moment before our clients even walked through the door that I knew that we had already won the day. We did it. Fast forwarding 15, 16 years into the future, today, I'm proud to say that that same group at that same company is still a client of Genesis Research.
That's an incredible story. You've shared some of that with me in the past, and just knowing you and Steve as we know you, I'm curious, just as a side thought, what did you all do when you found out you actually won the mandate after going through all that together? Did you guys go get a drink? Did you go to dinner? What was the feeling?
When you say won the mandate, you mean like won the work?
Yeah.
You know, Ryan, I think we celebrated before we won the work, because just the fact that we were able to put that together and have a successful site visit, the work was a much smaller mountain compared to what we just accomplished. And it was a great meeting. And I think that, that day instilled a real sense in ourselves that we could do anything and we will do anything.
Any other big learnings that you'd like to share from that experience and sort of those early days?
Yeah. Looking back, that day and a lot of the days like that reinforced to me that this is exactly where I needed to be. Prior to this meeting, I was questioning, like, is this path viable? Is this going to work? But after that, I knew that I lived for that kind of intensity. My ability to succeed and be fulfilled is grounded in embracing uncertainty. Not just embracing it, I should say, but enjoying it, being familiar with it, being friends with it, right? Uncertainty and change is where things happen. I like that. And, in reflection, I think I had lots of reps growing up that prepared me for this uncertainty and the subsequent moments that unfold that can make, break, or launch your organization.
Well, that's a good segue into sort of maybe a question around your childhood, which may have informed your joyful embrace of uncertainty and your amazing executive agility, I would add. Tell us about that childhood and tell us how that may have shaped that morning with you and Steve faking it till you make it in Hoboken.
Yeah. So I kind of had an unorthodox childhood. I was born and grew up in Yonkers, New York, which is a suburb of New York City. I was an only child. My parents split when I was 6. And my mother and I lived with my grandparents, her parents, in kind of an extended family. My grandparents were very special people. They were part of that greatest generation that lived through the Depression, World War II, gave rise to the baby boomers. They had an incredible work ethic, loyal, frugal, modest, patriotic, and they knew what was important in life. They brought a sense of normalcy to my childhood. They were in their 60s and 70s at the time, and my grandfather still worked. He was a furrier in Brooklyn, and my grandmother still ran the household. And I just learned so much from them growing up and their ability to just smell the roses and enjoy the simple things in life and not let the noise get to them. My grandmother was a very special person. She had an incredible influence on me at an early age. And I think this was without a doubt a key factor in my success in life. This was the 80s, before daycare, preschool. You stayed home until kindergarten. You remember it. My grandmother, I don't know, maybe she saw some ability in me, or maybe she just wanted to make sure I was best prepared. But she spent all day fostering it. She taught me how to read at 3. And soon after that, I was devouring books, encyclopedias, anything I can get my hands on. I had so many questions every day, and she answered every single one of them. By the time I did go to school, it was kindergarten, and I was reading and mathing at like a 3rd grade level. I went directly from kindergarten to 2nd grade, where I was still kind of head and shoulders above the class academically. And that allowed me to be a 12-year-old freshman in high school, a 16-year-old freshman in college, and so on and so forth.
You know, you could say that and sound entitled. And yet in this case, it's with such gratitude, and you're giving most of the glory to your mom and your grandmother and grandfather, and just the way that they raised you. That's certainly refreshing in this day and age.
It was a privilege, now that I look back on it, to be raised by that generation. It was a privilege. And I think it made me kind of that old soul at a young age.
Yeah. Were there some learnings that, aside from the agility and sort of leaning into uncertainty, I mean, what were some of your other, I guess, learnings on reflection that have informed you today?
Well, I think that, first of all, were their values, right? Their values of commitment. So, they were married, I think, almost 70 years. They both lived into their 90s, but they were just very committed people to whatever they did. Commitment, faith, and frugality in business, especially in the beginning, can pay serious dividends down the road. So a lot of my values I got from them. And, as I look back and reflect, it was also an early lesson to me on what a first mover advantage was. I had a first mover advantage because of the time that my grandmother dedicated to me and got me ready. I was coming out of the gates at a much, much higher level. And you see that in business today, when you have businesses with really great disruptive ideas, speed kills. We'll talk later about what I did with that first mover advantage, but I can tell you, as a father to 3 now, even with the resources I have now, I feel like I haven't even come close to investing in my children like my grandmother invested in me.
Yeah. Well, it's an unorthodox childhood, and one without a father or siblings.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about my own childhood. Those are pretty important things to me. And I'm curious, how did you, I guess, fill the void? I mean, obviously your grandparents and mother did what they could, but how did you fill a void of not having, siblings and a father, and how did that translate into, becoming a good teammate, becoming a good leader, and understanding all of that without those, I'd say, role models around you?
Yeah, it's a good question. So starting off with siblings, I never really felt like an only child growing up because I had, in a way, manufactured siblings. So just as my mother and I lived with my grandparents, so did my mother's sister and her daughter. And it was a big house that was a home to a large extended family under my grandparents. And my cousin Dina, who's 9 years older than me to the day, was nothing less than a big sister to me from my early memories to today. And we both lived that kind of unorthodox childhood under my grandparents, and we were like brother and sister. As far as manufacturing brothers, I think that took a few years. But, by the time I was in 3rd grade, I had a group of guys around me that are still with me to this day. And I think that's very uncommon these days. Most of these guys didn't have brothers of their own. And, some of the ones that did, there was usually, such a large age gap. So we kind of all became each other's brothers. And these guys played a serious part in my growth and development. I was a late bloomer. I don't know if you know that, Ryan, but I bloomed late. And for whatever reason, either their age, their influence, maturity, most of my friends were a step ahead of me growing up, probably all the way through college. And I looked up to them with admiration and learned from their strengths, their successes, their wins. And today, our relationship is just much more family than friends, right? We all have our own lives, some similar, some different, but the bond we have is straight up family. And, when it comes to my father, for a large part of my childhood, we were kind of on and off. So I did have experiences with him in my life, but I was also able to look at multiple male role models in kind of an objective way without an overabundance of an emotional attachment to one person and say, this person does this really well and this person does that really well. And just kind of look at people's strengths and kind of try and put that together into what I would want to become. So, life deals you a hand and you play it.
Yeah, we have talked about the father part of that, and we share in our childhoods. I similarly had a bunch of ski coaches and other males that were in my life. And similarly, only after you shared this context with me could I relate to the benefit of looking at role modeling as a portfolio of folks that you can take the things that they do really well and try to mimic those things. And then also with no attachment that you might have felt to your biological father, you can look at things that they don't do very well with a clear head and say, boy, I don't want to be like that either. And I don't know many people in my life that have been raised in that way, and curious how that led to maybe some of the ways you show up at work, today. Like how did that shape some of your leadership philosophies?
Yeah. So I think if I could boil that whole experience of parents and siblings and manufacturing to one thing, it's just adaptability, right? Sometimes you have in your mind a perfect something. Let's say business wise, it's an organizational design, right? And you have this perfect vision in your head, but you might not have the right people right now to play the right positions in this ideal model in your head. So what do? You can hire, right? That's one path, but it can be expensive, take time, and affect culture. Or you can be creative, right? You could think a little bit differently and say, this is who I have. This is what they're good at. This is what their roles and responsibilities will be. And you manufacture a new structure. And it can be an intermediate structure. It doesn't have to be the long term, but you're moving forward. You're not standing still, and you're playing the hand that you're dealt. And in business, speed and momentum are so important, especially in startups. You don't have time to stand still and think and say, oh, well, this is what I have. Maybe it'll change someday. You have to go and get after it and be adaptable and make what you have work and continuously make what you have better. So those early childhood things. And again, I'm 7 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old. I don't have this. I'm not, driving this from a conscious perspective to build skills. It's just kind of what happened. But when you look back on it and you look back on these experiences and you say, what did I learn and what did I take with me? There are absolutely things that you take with you. And mine was definitely adaptability.
That's an interesting point you're making about, like, if you wait for perfect, good will pass you by. I think there's an expression, better be approximately right than precisely wrong.
Yeah.
And particularly when you're trying to build organizational capacity, waiting for that perfect hire or that round of funding that's going to allow you to hire that perfect C-suite.
Yep.
All that waiting might prevent you from moving forward. And in the process, you lose that momentum that you're talking about. And I wonder how many startups fail just because they forget the most important thing is movement. And it may not be in the perfect direction or in the perfect way, but movement is the key. You got to keep on moving. There's a song like that, I think, somewhere. But anywho, so what about growing up in a family like that? My wife grew up similarly, by the way, to the way you were raised, and she is so entrepreneurial. She's a doctor by training, but like the things that come out of her mouth in terms of like business instincts and like entrepreneurial, I'd say street smarts, are just amazing to me.
Yeah.
Do you think that you were destined to be an entrepreneur, and what were some of those, I guess, early entrepreneurial influences that maybe teed you up perfectly for who you became?
Yeah, Ryan, that's a really good question, and I've never really thought about it. I think in some ways you can say that maybe I was destined to be an entrepreneur, and in other ways you could say, wow, this was just a happy accident that happened. And we'll never know, but here we are. As far as early entrepreneurial influences, yeah, that's an easy one. I think when I was in early high school, or maybe late grade school, I watched my uncle, my mother's brother, leave his job. He was working as a furrier with my grandfather and started his own small business. And it was bread routes. And what I saw and what I learned was freedom, prosperity, independence can all be achieved with vision, hard work, and grit. He and his wife, they were like second parents to me growing up, and more age-appropriate parents. And I learned so much from them. And the funny thing, Ryan, is as he was building his small business and his successes, selling his house, he used to live down the block from me in Yonkers and built this big, beautiful house on a hill in a nicer neighborhood. Most people just saw those symbols of success. But I saw the hard work and risk and grit that went into it. This guy was grinding, he was delegating, and he was stepping in whenever he had to. And I think most people miss that. They miss the grind and just see the symbols. And what this taught me was you could work hard for yourself on your terms, or you could work hard for someone else on their terms. And he wasn't the only one. Many of my friends, right, my manufactured brothers and their relatives were entrepreneurs and small business owners. Different from the entrepreneurs that I think you and I deal with, like selling and scaling and selling. These people had more like lifestyle companies built around them and their skill sets. But, when you saw their life, it was attractive. And again, it wasn't the material aspects of it. It was the freedom. It was the time with their families. It was their ability to help people and the fact that they just drive their own future and can build on previous wins. There wasn't a cap.
So I think this is an opportunity to give you a little bit of a poke, because with that upbringing and sort of that like destined to be an entrepreneur thing happening, I'm curious why your first step in that journey was to get a PhD in physics. I've never understood this. And when I first met you, by the way, I wasn't sure if I should call you Dr. Corvino. Thank God I didn't. You probably would have kicked me out of your office, but it is unusual in my line of work and now our line of work where you meet founders that took a first step into academia. I ran away from academia as quickly as I could. You were an adult, you had lots of options. Why in the world did you go get a PhD in physics?
So I'm going to stop you right there. I wasn't an adult and I had no options. So in a lot of ways, physics saved my life. So after high school, I went to college upstate, Siena College, for a couple of years, played football, but very, very quickly, I just lost all ambition. I was in a bad spot. I was in like a life rut. I stopped playing after my second season, eventually dropped out of school. My grades were horrible. Any first mover advantage I had as a kid through grade school and high school was gone. And I was about 19 or 20 years old. I took a year off from college. I bartended, started earning a few dollars and felt like somewhat of a productive member of society. I knew I had to get back into school, and by some miracle, I got into Fordham University. But I was still lost, Ryan, with respect to what I wanted to do in life. I had no dreams, no ambition, and no vision. And that's when things changed. I took a physics class as a prerequisite with a professor named Jay Mancini. First thing I saw was his last name. I figured he was Italian. I tried to bribe him with giving me a passing grade. That fell flat quickly. This is a guy that has spent his whole life helping others. That's what he lives for. It's a extremely selfless and underappreciated life, but very fulfilling to him and obviously the people that he helps. This guy probably changed more lives than he even knows about. And he saw something in me that I did not even see in myself. It was like the movie Good Will Hunting, right? It was like that kind of relationship. And it changed my life. This guy knew how to motivate me and get in my face. He would tell me, you can't do it. You should really give up because, physics is too hard for you. And he knew that is what lit kind of the fire in me to prove him wrong and show him what I can do. And I ended up staying an extra year at Fordham. So those grades that I skipped, I gave back, majored in physics. Upon graduation, I knew I needed to learn more. And so he helped me get into a Ph.D. program at Stevens Institute of Technology. He was an undergrad there and a research professor there. So that's what actually brought me to Hoboken back in 2002, 2003. And in Hoboken is where I found my stride. I turned back around. I graduated with a 4.0 summa cum laude, published thesis, and was a recipient of the Stanley Crooks Fellowship at Stevens. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. And to this day, I stay very connected to Stevens. I serve on the board of their business school and give back generously and often because that was a place that transformed my life.
I think I've got this right, but when you went back to Hoboken to do your physics PhD, or went to Hoboken, I guess that was your first.
Yeah.
That was when you got to Hoboken. Was that in the apartment that's across the street from your family's home today in Hoboken?
That's exactly right. And it's beautiful because when I walk out of my door, I look at kind of where it all started. And it's just a reminder for me, never forget your humble beginnings and just how kind of things can go full circle.
Yeah. I mean, the first time, because you were building your new home or remodeling it, rebuilding it when we were working very intensely together. And I remember when you took me to your home and just like that pride that I could see in you. And we went out to the curb or whatever. And you said, I'm very proud of this home. But you said, I'm even more proud that that's the home that I got here and lived in those many years ago. And I could not believe like the Babe Ruth nature of pointing to the stands and hitting it out of the park from across the street and into this home that you built for your family. It's a really cool story. It gives me goosebumps for sure. Aside from maybe finding confidence or refinding confidence, maybe curious, kidding aside on the physics thing and PhD and so forth. I mean, what were some of the things from physics that have informed your business life? Anything in particular?
So, studying physics and getting my PhD was the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life. And it's one of those things where no matter how hard you work, and this is at least how I felt, like no matter how hard I could work my hardest, I still might fail. That 4.0 GPA was driven from a perspective of fear because I would have been happy with, a B, and I was just working so hard that I ended up overachieving. Physics requires both preparation and performance. You need both. You can't just have one or the other. You could study till you're blue in the face, but when it comes time to take that test, you have your textbooks, you have your notebook, you have everything you need. Can you put that information together and perform? So that's one big thing. Preparation and performance, you need both. It also got me very, very comfortable with uncertainty. And I'm not talking about the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. I'm talking about uncertainty. Like I said, every day, every class, every research I was doing, the chance of failure was just so high. And again, you not only learn how to live with it, but you learn how to thrive with that uncertainty. Another aspect was a communication aspect, believe it or not. While you're getting your Ph.D., you're doing a lot of teaching. You're a teaching assistant, you're a research assistant. And I really learned how to communicate complex principles in everyday terms, which is an art in any business. And then lastly, I think, a lot of the people I was around, especially Jay, they taught me to be creative. They taught me how to think differently, taught me how to innovate. But when you have people like that, especially in an academic setting, that dedicate their lives to helping people and focusing on the humanity, I think it made me a better person when it came to going into business. And it's not that I don't have regrets, but business can be very ruthless. It's a tough world and there are casualties. And so I learned how to minimize them.
Yeah, it's well said. Segueing a bit, I haven't seen your website interview. On our website, we always have these a little bit more in-depth caricatures of each of our upbringings and learnings and all these kinds of things. If you punch the picture on our website, give us the spoiler alert. One of the questions is, what's the toughest part of your life? Now, we've heard a lot of tough already in this interview, but if you look back on all of it, what was the toughest thing that you had to overcome?
Yeah, that's an easy one. So in my second year at Stevens, just getting into my groove, putting my life back together, feeling confident, feeling passionate about what I'm doing. It's July 4th, 2004. I get a call. My mother's been rushed to the hospital. And she was diagnosed like in that hospital with stage 4 lung and brain cancer and given 6 months to live. So my world kind of stopped there, right? Because I'm an only child to a single mother. And I actually reached out to my uncle, my father's brother this time, who was CEO of Greenwich Hospital, for help and advice. And he convinced me to sign her out of the hospital she was in against medical advice and bring her up to Greenwich. This was a hospital in Connecticut that my uncle had transformed from a local community to a regional powerhouse. And, the stars align, they align. In residence, he had one of the top neurosurgeons in the world there. His name is Dr. Gogawala. I think he's currently up at Harvard and Boston General. And an onc team that could rival MSK. I think the oncologist's name was Arthur Rosenberg, if I remember correctly. He's long retired. And one of the best primary care physicians in James Brunetti. But even with all these mavens, the outlook was bleak. I remember being in the office with her and she asked to speak to other patients that had her similar diagnosis. And the look on the doctor's face was, there aren't any. But he couldn't say that, but he said it without saying it. And look, everyone had given up hope and was really preparing for the worst, myself included, everyone except her. And her physicians, her faith, and her will to live, combined with the matrix of care and love she had around her, set the table for a miraculous recovery. And someone who was given 6 months to live, she was in remission in 5 months, and she has never relapsed. And this past July, we celebrated 20 years since her diagnosis.
Congratulations to your mom. That's an amazing story. I know this from just watching you as the CEO and having met your co-founder, Steve, in addition to your mother, I know Steve was a big influence in your life and maybe possibly a crossroads, a turning point, a sliding door, just meeting him. Tell us how you met your co-founder and just sort of like that whole story. I've heard it a couple times, but I just love this story. And knowing Steve as I do, I love hearing it. So tell us a bit about Steve, your co-founder of Genesis Research.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I'm finishing up my Ph.D. at Stevens. My mother is in remission. And, talk about a full circle story. Jay, my physics professor at Fordham, calls me. He's now at Kingsborough College in Brooklyn, and he offers me a teaching gig. So it's 2009. I had a vision to get my PhD and work in finance as a quant. But as I said, it's 2009 and the recession shattered that. So my plan changed. I was going to be a professor and, get a couple of side hustles. So I'm at Kingsborough writing a grant with another professor, and she said, I have to introduce you to my neighbor. He's an entrepreneur. He just sold his company. He's in the process of starting something new. So, I agreed to meet with him. And he lived on the beach. And I remember going to the beach that day with a couple of friends so I could stop by his house. And I did. And, he was probably a little bit over 50 at the time. And he walked out on his porch with a bathing suit, sandals, and a gold blue face Submariner. He had a great tan, a warm smile, and was calm, confident, and personable. This guy was just larger than life for me. Still is today for different reasons. But I remember, meeting him and being just in awe. And I met his lovely wife, Sarah, and we walked, to his backyard, through his driveway, past about 3 Mercedes, to see his kids playing with their friends in the backyard. And we sat down. And this is the really cool part. We didn't talk healthcare or consulting or anything like that. He shared with me something much bigger. And it was a vision of a life. It was a life that I didn't know was possible for me until that moment. And I could almost feel that life just by being there. And I remember telling him either that day or subsequent, I want to be you when I grow up. And his response was, no, you need to do better. And I didn't understand that at the time or even think that was possible. But now I see where he's coming from. It's what all mentors want for their mentees. It's not just to pass the torch, but to elevate it. And, Steve was very different from a lot of the entrepreneurs and small business owners than I had come to know previously. He wasn't looking for a lifestyle business. He was looking to build, scale, and sell. And it was a whole new ball game. And it's a ball game that I wanted to play and win.
Well said. And you did. Well, and Steve did too. You both had an amazing run. What else? I know you've shared some of your learnings with Steve over the years here, but what else did Steve teach you? Just from maybe more from a business standpoint, perhaps.
Yeah. First thing about Steve is that he loved the game. He loved the grind. He loved the process. He didn't need to be doing this with me at that point. He was very successful, very employable. He did it because he loved it. Second thing with Steve, and I've seen this with my uncle and others, great way with people. He was so personable and was really able to connect very well with everybody he came in touch with. It was such a great skill that he has and something that I wanted to emulate because I see how powerful it was when you make that connection with people. He was frugal, very similar to my grandparents, but he also knew what to spend on. He was selective with his spending, but never hesitated to throw money at something that was of value. And then lastly, Steve, like my mother, saw no other way to evolve Genesis other than incredible success. And in our darkest moments, he used to say, nothing stops this train. And whether he really believed it or not, doesn't matter. He inspired me to think that we were Teflon, probably knowing that, with that, I would act accordingly and give us our best shot at winning. So I could go on about everything that Steve taught me, but I think those are the key points.
As you were going through that list, I was trying to think what I learned from him. And it wasn't necessarily anything tactical. I think what impressed me was, in this line of work, I think we meet a lot of really arrogant people, just as a general rule of thumb.
Yeah.
A lot of very successful folks can kind of believe their own bullshit and they show up like that. And it's just, at this point in my career, I just run away from people like that.
Yep.
There's this other crew that typically is even more successful than those people who are arrogant, but have this sense of like extreme confidence. And so this like difference between meeting people who are confident and meeting people who are arrogant has always been sort of binary for me. Like, is this a confident person or is this an arrogant person? And I really try to like filter that out pretty quick when I meet founders, especially.
Yeah.
But after meeting Steve, I have this third category. Now, it's not binary. There's a third thing that's maybe even bigger, and it kind of comes from this place of, success versus significance. It's somewhere in there. But what strikes me about Steve is like his gentle confidence.
Mm-hmm.
There's a soothing version of confidence that comes out of him. It kind of radiates the room when he walks in. And, I've never maybe had the courage to ask him where that comes from, but what would be your theory? And have you seen that same sort of quality in Steve that you've tried to emulate in your, I guess, personal and professional life?
I think you said it very well. It's a gentle, graceful confidence. And that was the man. When we were talking about, in the beginning, how he set up that office, he came to me with that gentle confidence that I have great news. So-and-so's interested. They want to do a site visit. And while my stomach was like churning, like, how are we going to get this done? His gentle, graceful confidence probably did play a key role in me stepping back and say, okay, how are we going to do this? Right? Maybe calming down my anxieties a little bit and allowing me to focus. And Steve's interesting because yes, he's a physician. Yes, he's a health economist. I think he could have, been a founder and an entrepreneur in almost any field because he has an uncanny ability to get the right people together and form the right matrix that is just going to run very well and also kind of inspire them with that gentle, graceful confidence.
Yeah, that's really well said. All right. Well, we know how Genesis started with the furniture and the rented office space and the signage and the students from the school and all that stuff. Just hilarious. Why don't we segue into the business of Genesis Research? And, from that moment, you obviously, got a great client that is with you still today. And, from that moment on, kind of give us the arc of Genesis Research. How did you get traction and kind of what was the secret sauce, if you will? Like what's your takeaway from that journey?
Yeah, there were probably a lot. But I think the first thing to talk about is what made Genesis different. First thing is Steve and myself. Steve's got a clinical background. I'm a quantitative scientist, right? You marry those two skill sets together at the right time in the right industry, and it was very disruptive. So as we started, it was Steve, myself, and a jolly band of young, smart misfits. And what I mean by that is a lot of our early hires were just smart young kids out of school. either out of undergrad or out of grad school. They'd come to us and we built a bottom-up organization. And I think building that bottom-up organization took us some time, but it really cemented the culture that drove a lot of what we did into the future. Second thing is that, at Genesis, we kind of changed both the what and the how. Sometimes companies, change the what. Sometimes they change the how. We were able to do both. So we were working with a lot of large data sets before it was mainstream. So real world evidence is what it's known as now. When we were doing it, it didn't even have that moniker. It didn't even have that name. It was just healthcare data analytics with claims, registries, EHR, so on and so forth. So we really had a first mover advantage with respect to that. The second thing is the how. We changed the way pharma and biotech kind of worked with groups like ours. And so just to give you a little background, this industry, let's take, HEOR, used to be mainly economic models and dossiers and lit reviews. And I think that's a lot of stuff that Steve did in his prior life. And it was transactional, 3-month projects that didn't give revenue visibility. You go out, you pitch, you get the opportunity, you send a proposal, you win the work, 3 months, and then you got to figure something else out. Very transactional, very small time to burn up your backlog, if you will. But we changed that. So luckily, the groups we were working with in the beginning, the groups that actually had the data were under clinical and R&D. And these groups were used to FSP models, right? I think that's functional service provider, or FTE models. And so we were able to convince them that, look, we're going to be doing this year round. Let's put together an annual contract where, we can have John, Bob, and Susan dedicated to you for the year and work with your team and expand it. So we were able to kind of move from scoped work in a transactional nature to a partnership nature. But there was still something missing with that model. And what was missing was, if we're working with a company and they're committing to kind of 3 FTEs, what if they need 4? Do we then have to hire somebody, train them, make sure they're good, and then bring them in? That's going to take a long time. Or what if the opposite would happen? What if they had 3 and one of my people left? And now I could only provide them with 2, right? We're a small company. They don't want to hear about those small company issues. So how could we make this model even better? So the great thing about this model is that we had revenue visibility. The tough thing about it is that there was a lot of risk on both sides. So the way we evolved this was, instead of being, human FTEs, we were able to fractionalize the skill sets. And as this grew, this became a lot more popular. Maybe you don't need 3 programmers. Maybe you just need 2.5. Maybe you don't need a full epidemiologist. Maybe you just need half of epidemiologists. And so by fractionalizing these skill sets, we did a couple of things. One, we reduced the risk of people leaving and us not being able to deliver. 2, we set up something where we can put a team together for a client. We could put, let's say, a team of 4 together for a client, even though they only wanted 2 FTEs. But when they're ready to go to 3, we could increase next week because you have 4 people. You could just spread out the work. So it helped us scale. It reduced risk. And what it really did for pharma was shorten their timelines to get stuff done and also lower their costs. Because when you're continuously working with somebody, there's just a lower learning curve to go right into the next project. So we were able to do things faster for less money, but with very high quality in a way that nobody else was doing it. So in a way, we had a revolutionary business model that's getting more and more mainstream today. And we were kind of like the Uber for healthcare research, right? Uber changed taxi transportation by changing the how. And we changed research by changing the how. more visibility on what you're getting, when you're getting it, and flexibility to course correct in real time. Those were all things that we share with Uber in our models. Our company was driven by culture. We had a results-oriented culture and also NPS. And we never actually got an NPS score, but it had to be as close to 100 as possible because we had zero sales team. And we were not only growing at over 100% with our current clients, over 100%, which means not only would they renew year over year, but they would renew and expand. But they would also be the number one source for any new references we had. And this went on for over a decade. We had thinkers, doers, sellers at the tip of the spear. And I think our clients really appreciated it. We also had no fads, no gimmicks. It was real research, real science, innovative, client-centric, out-of-the-box solutions. And that's what got us through the startup days. And that's still what's driving us forward to this day.
I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. And I wish we could spend more time on this because for those people listening that have a consulting business that want to think outside the box and increase their earnings visibility and thereby increase the multiple that their business is worth, this is a real textbook conversation about how to turn a business that isn't all that attractive to the buyer universe into something that is highly sought after. And just your comparison between your business and Uber is such a good example. I mean, there was a time, it was like 3 years ago, Uber traded for 117 times EBITDA. It was an incredible multiple. Today it trades for 39 times EBITDA, which is still just stunning. But if you went to go buy a taxi company, I'm not even sure that business has a value necessarily. And so that should serve as some inspiration for some of our listeners who might have a similar opportunity if they just dream a bit more and use their right brain a bit more and lean into innovation. How did you get through the other part of your business that was a challenge, Frank, in terms of, kind of a saturated Me Too? I picture a bunch of researchers that were offering their services kind of like maybe as 1099s or, whatever. How did you become different in the eyes of your buyer universe or the clients in the pharma and life sciences sector?
Yeah. So again, we were doing a different what, but as you mentioned, that what quickly got saturated with folks. And they got saturated from everyone from independent contractors, like single bodies, single shingles, all the way to large organizations. And what got us through was the how, because nobody was able to work. I don't think anybody still is, how we worked in a true partnership way. And the history that we had built with these organizations over the past decade reinforced it because we had so much institutional knowledge working with our partners, all of their drugs, all of the databases, really what they needed, what we needed to do to fit their strategy. It would have been very hard for them to unravel that in a way. So I think it was the how and the institutional history and relationships that we had with our clients that has kept us and continues to keep us head and shoulders above our clients. And when it comes to competition, single shingles are great, but you can't scale them. And there's incredible key person risk with them. And large companies, they can get the work done, but it's also very, very bureaucratic. And I say that now, Genesis is probably considered a large company, but we still function with agility.
Yeah. That's a good point to how to keep that differentiation as you get bigger. And I'm sure that's a daily challenge that you guys confront now, different challenges as you get bigger versus those early days. We sort of met you after you had more or less become a thing in the industry. You all had developed an incredible reputation. You were serving, I don't know, I mean, just round numbers, probably a dozen of the top 20 pharmaceutical companies in the world. Very impressive financial performance, certainly. Why don't you give us your side of how you met Rallyday and how that all went down, and maybe segue, if you don't mind, into what that whole experience was like, and give us the non-commercial version for our listeners. We don't want this to become a infomercial on Rallyday necessarily, but
when you say my side, is there another side to this story that I should know about?
well, yeah, there was our side as a buyer. You were looking for an investor. I guess at this point those lines are blurred substantially, but at the time you were looking for something. I think looking for a liquidity event, looking for a capital partner. I don't know what you were looking for, but you found us. So how did that all happen?
Well, you guys found us. I will tell my side of the story, okay?
Okay, fine.
So we're 10 years in, right? 10 years into Genesis, and we're making a name for ourselves. And when you're making a name for yourself in the industry, the private equity vultures started to swarm and circle overhead. And we'd meet them, and I'm sure they're wonderful people, but we just weren't really looking forward to working with any of them. And I knew we needed an investment because we were 10 years in, and Steve and I were in different phases of our lives, and we wanted different things, and we were both committed to finding the win-win-win. The win for me, the win for him, the win for Genesis. So, okay, we need to start considering private equity because that seems like a path towards the win-win-win. So probably met with close to a dozen groups at this point until Rallyday found us and got a breakfast on the books. And at that breakfast were two of your partners and now my partners, Mark Hopkins, who was incredibly impressive. He sat next to me. And Nancy Phillips, who sat directly across from me, who was very captivating and really was able to control my attention. And it was just incredible. It was different. Mark and Nancy were people like us. They were founders too. And it was just such a differentiated breakfast. Now, that being said, breakfast was over and Steve and I were walking to the office. And I remember the conversation like it was yesterday. They were saying, oh man, that was incredible. What wonderful people. And we started talking about the breakfast. And then the skeptical New Yorkers in us kicked in. And we were like, but they got to be full of shit though, right? Too good to be true. And then I think Steve would chime in and say, yeah, we'd be their first investment in their first fund. We don't want to be those guinea pigs. Oh, absolutely not. But wonderful people though, nonetheless. And we did not reach back out to you guys until one miserable evening in central England. It was miserable weather to meet a miserable day. We were meeting with a company that another PE firm wanted to merge us with. They wanted to slap us together and acquire it into the platform. And we spent the whole day there meeting these people. And I remember leaving that meeting with Steve. And it was just, we were drained. And we didn't say much after the meeting, but the look on our faces spoke very clearly. And what our body language was saying was, this is going to suck. And for the walk back to our rooms, speaking for myself, I just experienced like a temporary hopelessness. And when we got back to our rooms, I shot Steve a text. And I said, listen, you're going to think this is crazy, but what about we call the guys from Colorado? And he was like, let's do it. So I think within an hour, we had you, Mark, and Nancy on that call. And it was the first time that you and I had ever connected. And I know we started talking about, culture and, how to quantify it and how important that is to a business. And that's where Nancy had her line. And her line was, listen, guys, we have money and we could move fast. Now, fast forward to the future. I know now that you hadn't raised the fund yet, but to her credit, that sentence pulled me out of a dark place and gave Steve and I hope.
I mean, can we just pause there for a second? Because it's just kind of hilarious. Yeah. I mean, you told your story of faking it till you make it, but it was really tough on us. We knew we wanted to be a partner with Genesis, but we literally didn't have a dime. I remember we invited you to Denver. I think you showed up like December 9th, I want to say. We've laughed together where you sat in our conference room here in Denver. And while the office was real, I mean, we didn't have, what's the expression, 2 pennies to rub together or 2 nickels to rub together?
That's right.
And I remember in our first meeting, I said, how much money can we put into Genesis? as if I had this big bucket of money and wanted to make sure we could spend as much of it as possible. But, I guess we all, at some points in our lives, particularly as entrepreneurs, we do have to fake it till we make it, and maybe that's what we had in common out of the gate. But it is a funny story. And mercifully, we did raise the capital by, I think it was, so December 9th, we raised the fund, I think on February 13th or 17th, something like that. We didn't tell you that, hey, good news, Frank, we actually have the money now. And then we closed, I want to say on February the 28th, and we were off to the races. But those were some tense times as we were running up legal bills and diligence bills and weren't paying anybody any money. And I think we got to about $1.2 million of expenses that we owed a whole bunch of people. And we were terrified that, what if we didn't raise our fund, or maybe we didn't raise it on time, but it's so worth it, right? On both sides. And I know now that you knew we didn't have any money, and it makes me love you even more that you were putting up with our bullshit and you still were like committed to this partnerships. It says a lot.
Looking back on it now, we were both in really pivotal moment for the birth of Rallyday and the future of Genesis. You had your issues you were dealing with, and we had our issues with respect to finding a partner that we were dealing with. And I think that when we got together and really got to know each other, I think we realized that we're going to get through these difficult moments together. And looking back on it, I think we got through difficult moment before we even signed and before we even became partners. Just by getting to the point where we could be partners was us using each other to make 2 painful situations go away.
That's a great way of putting it. So we close. We're now partners. We had spent, just by a little way of background, we didn't have any capital. We had spent the better part of about a year, almost a year and a half, maybe, building out a bunch of infrastructure for Rallyday, including this new program that we called RAP, which was the Rallyday Accelerator Program. We tried to take everything that we had learned from our first 6 months with private equity firms as our owners of the companies that we had built. So what could we do differently in those first 6 months that maybe no one ever had tried? It was in the spirit of building a good foundation from which you could build an even better, bigger business, perhaps with less risk. And the word accelerator actually in the name of the program had nothing to do with growth. It had everything to do with accelerating the trust between us as a private equity sponsor and you as a CEO and founder and your executive team, importantly, and maybe even your employees. And we were really excited to test drive this thing. Tell us about those first 6 months, and we might need to laugh at the environment in which we were prototyping this thing. A certain little health event happened in the world, I think 2 weeks after we closed, right? Something like that?
Yeah, shortly after.
Tell us.
So I think what brought us to the point of partnership, if I can just say, was that Steve and I were convinced that these guys get it. And they don't just get us and get our business. They are us. And they're going to be true partners, not only in the good times, but in the tough times. And that's how I pick my partners. That's how I pick my friends. That's how I pick, like you pick your wife. Everybody's your friend in the good times. But who do you want to stand shoulder to shoulder with when things go sideways? So we get started, and one of the things that really, kicked off fast was the learning curve. I mean, you guys went from not really knowing what HEOR and RWE was to pretty much leading some of our town halls. And Mark especially got up to speed so fast. I'm a lifelong learner, and I love digging into new stuff, but I had met my match. And when we got started to get into rap was probably one of the biggest factors that set us up for our long-term success. And the reason I say that is because there has been a certain, I don't want to say maybe discomfort with private equity, but private equity has a reputation to where I think when a company gets acquired by private equity or gets a private equity investment, the people of the organization feel like, okay, everything's going to change. It's all about numbers now. The company as we knew it was gone. And one of the first things that Rap did was bring all of the key people from our company together. And it's not just the C-suite, but it's 2 levels down to align strategy and culture and who we are and who we were and who we want to be and how we're going to get there. What are the key things that we want to achieve? How are we going to go about achieving them? Right? And when you have, 2-3 levels down from the CEO, all on the same call, all speaking the same language, it just aligns the company. And, you said the goal wasn't to accelerate growth. It was to accelerate trust, but we accelerated growth through trust. And it was one of the most unique experiences of my life where trust happened so fast, right? I'm the type where, like, if I don't know you for 20 years, I don't trust you. And this really, really changed it for me.
Yeah, obviously I love hearing that, and we've improved it. I think what made that particularly challenging was we all had to go remote. Like, I think it was March 17th, something like that. And you guys had to move out of your office. We couldn't come to Hoboken. And so we were prototyping this, powerful program over Zoom, all of us learning to turn mute off, for example, when the time needed, et cetera, et cetera. And that we were able to build trust so effectively through, virtual meetings was a testament to, the program, I think. But it was also pretty sloppy. And, looking back, I'm so glad that we've got a team that's been improving that model. But like, to talk about the purpose of an organization, to talk about the strategy, then talk about the culture that's going to need to be more powerful to pursue the strategy that's in service to the purpose, and then spending all that time on leadership development of your team and the people that worked with you beneath the C-suite. I mean, all that stuff is such a catalytic moment when it's embraced and led by a leader like you. And I agree. I mean, like, by month 3, the text messages and all the emails, the formality went away. We were talking about problems more openly, and it felt like we had been working together for 5 years by the 5th month in so many ways. And so while we may not have got it technically right because of the situation, the outcome of trust development was was really the basis of what became a really powerful partnership. What's love on? I mean, we're going to fast forward a bit to, you coming back to Rallyday, but you have a new sponsor at Genesis, GHO, who we certainly look up to as a peer in private equity in general. We were elated when you chose them as the next Rallyday, so to speak. Tell us about that a bit, going from one private equity sponsor to another one. And tell us about the moment at which you knew, okay, I'm going to go now be a private equity guy. Like, how did that whole thing happen in so many words?
Ryan, after 2 years of Rallyday and 2.5 years at GHO and 3 acquisitions, I was speaking to a friend of mine I went to business school with, and we were just talking hypothetically. And he said, look, if you want to make a move, now is probably the right time. You've been there for 15 years. If you stay there for another 2, it's probably going to turn into another 5. And then what are you going to want to do? And it was emotionally tough. I've been at Genesis for 15 years, and so much of my life was invested in the company, right? So much of who I was, my lifestyle, everything.
Your identity? I mean,
yeah, a little bit. You could say that. So what was next? I don't know if you recall the phone call.
I do. And it was similar to the one that I was having a day in San Francisco, like you and Steve were having in the UK when you decided to call Rallyday. And so the reciprocal of this situation is just kind of ironic. But yeah, I was in San Francisco. We had just had a closing celebration with the team at Pix Health, which we had exited. So I probably drank a bit too much the night before. I drove into the city. I was having some problems with one of my portfolio companies. I was alone. I was on the road. I was just kind of grumpy and I was just in a bad place. I was kind of in a dark place. And, your name came up on my phone. I was heading out for a run, and you said, "Hey, are you sitting down?" And I said, "Well, no, I'm actually heading out on a run." And you said, "Well, I got something pretty heavy I want to talk to you about." And this was, I don't know when this was, but it was some months ago. And I'll jump to the end of the story and then I'll let you feed in. But like after that conversation, I literally ran from San Francisco to the Golden Gate Bridge, across the bridge to Sausalito and back. And I don't know how many miles that is, but I remember I just felt this energy, inspiration about the future of Rallyday, knowing that there was even a possibility that we could get Frank Corvino to come back to Rallyday and help other founders as we invested in their companies. It was just like one of my professional highlights. So we've really not talked too much about this, but like what was going through your mind at that time?
Again, Genesis had been, besides for academia, my life and my career. And, I'm not going to stay the CEO of Genesis forever, right? So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I'm very lucky to have, and Genesis is very lucky to have a partner in GHO. For those of you who don't know GHO, it's Global Health Opportunities. They invest exclusively in healthcare. And if GHO even considers buying your company, you're doing something very right. And we were able to get them as partners. So as far as private equity partners, I've had probably 2 of the best in existence. And I consider myself very lucky and very atypical for a PE-backed CEO. And they worked with me on this. And we found a solution. And our new CEO, his name is Dave Miller. He's a Ph.D. He's an industry luminary. What I mean by that is like if you were to say a top 10 in HEOR and market access, or maybe even a top 5, his name would be on that list. And we are very lucky to have him in the slot. And he's doing an incredible job and working with our people and our industry and his in-depth knowledge of the industry trends to continue to innovate and grow our offering. And I'm very grateful to that organization. I'm very grateful to Dave, and I'm very excited to support them going forward from, my board role and anything else that they feel I can do to help continue to grow the company. So that was a really tough thing for me. But I think the matrix of people that I had around me and my investment partners made a tough soul searching situation a lot easier.
Yeah. And was Rallyday but one of the options you were considering? And why did you want to become a private equity executive? I'm not sure I would wish that for, well, maybe, I don't know. It's been quite a journey the last 25 years or whatever, but like, it's such some ways a hard job, and it's a slog, and you've obviously already had a tremendous amount of success. What was your calling to do private equity and to do it with us?
So again, when you decide to leave, right, there's that void, and you kind of let that void marinate for a little bit to see what comes in naturally. I could have done another startup. I could have been a professional CEO in another company. I could have worked with larger private equity and, of course, Rallyday. And what really made me gravitate towards Rallyday was a few things. One, it was my relationship and trust and experiences with Rallyday that made me kind of want to, give that back to future generations of entrepreneurs. Like, having founders in your corner like that really makes a difference. I could be that person to make a difference in another entrepreneur's life. And what really cemented it for me is, in the void in between, I did some CEO coaching and working with a couple of companies. One in particular is restoration, construction. And, you had the founder who's going through a process, and, just to be able to be there for him and share my experiences and what to focus on and what to not focus on, and getting through the emotional kind of roller coaster that it brings, and everything that goes around doing a deal on a company that you spent the past decade or more building, really, really reinforced my calling and what I needed to do going forward. Because to me, it wasn't work. It was care. It was something I cared about. But I can tell you, I don't, if you ask me what am I most looking forward to in joining Rallyday, it's working with founders. After having Steve and Mark as mentors and scaling GR from two guys running a lemonade stand to being a global name in healthcare and going through everything we went to, I have a lot to give. And, I believe that at Rallyday, I'm going to be able to support founders in a very similar way when acquiring their company as I would coaching them, regardless of where they are in the stage with the company. Because the way I look at it is that founder, that person's our partner from the day that we meet him or her, right? If we meet a founder and we end up, acquiring their company in 3 months, we still know them for 3 months prior. And I want to be able to treat them like our partner from that day forward. And what I mean by that is not treat them in a way that, is adverse to Rallyday's interests, but the fact that our interests are aligned and we want the same things. And we want that CEO to be successful and to continue to focus on the business and to bring that team along with him or her. And that's the role that I look forward to playing, with that entrepreneur. It's saying, listen, here we are, we're partners, we're shoulder to shoulder. This is diligence. This is noise. This is what you have to focus on. Focus on the business, focus on the people. This thing's going to take care of itself. And before you know it, we're all officially going to be on the same team. But unofficially, let's start that now. Because even after acquisition, I want you in a good headspace. I want you excited. I want you feeling good about this. And I want you ready to go and to leverage the momentum of the past 3 months that hopefully you weren't spending too much time doing diligence activities.
Yeah, it'll be fun to see you make that transition from monster CEO to monster private equity guy, and just the manner in which you do it. That use of the word monster is a good segue. We've only got 15 minutes left. We're doing a project right now at Rallyday to be more granular, to be more rigorous with what we mean by a monster CEO, which is maybe not the nicest word to use, but what we mean by that is someone who's going to change the world, like a founder who is just this extraordinary force of nature that's got that, gentle confidence, perhaps, that we talked about with Steve, someone who's a lifelong learner, someone who's got this combination of aggressive humility. I mean, we've got a list of probably a dozen or so attributes that we're looking for in founders that we think are common ingredients to success. But just curious, as someone I really look up to as a monster CEO, what will you be looking for, Frank, when you meet that founder at a breakfast, let's say, like we did you those many years ago, and kind of pull on that for a bit, riff on that with me if you don't mind.
Yeah. So what I'm going to be looking for in that monster is somebody who is looking past our deal and looking forward to what we could accomplish together. And I think that's what I kind of want to hear from him or her is I don't want to talk about the past. We know what you did. Congratulations. It was very successful. What can we do now together that we couldn't do apart? And if that monster really leans into that part of the business and really shares a 3 to 5 year vision of something epic, of something, huge dreams, then that's what's going to get me excited about working with that person. And that's going to be inspiring to me. And hopefully that inspiration is going to flow across to all of us and all the employees.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. What are some of the characteristics that you're not looking for?
So, not looking for anybody who is arrogant or uncoachable. I think that goes without saying, right? You could be confident without being arrogant, and it's that fine line that we look for. I'm not looking for anybody who is going to celebrate the past instead of creating the future. I'm going to be very attentive on how that person treats everybody and look for somebody that treats everybody with the same amount of respect and consideration, no matter where you are on the totem pole. And Ryan, I'm looking for somebody with a little bit of an edge, with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, with a little something to prove, with a little of that, I'm never really satisfied part of their personality, because that's what continues to drive people. It's not, I accomplished this and now we're good. It's no, there's more. There's that hunger. There's that fire that keeps going.
Yeah, we had a debate a couple of years ago about word choice in our list of attributes. And there was a camp at Rallyday that wanted passionate founders. And there was a different camp that wanted obsessed founders. And it turned into maybe just a cop out to some degree, but we settled on people who had a joyful obsession, which was to say that healthy version of obsession that's got a chip on their shoulder. And I compare that to maybe who's a leader who's possessed. We definitely don't want those kind of folks, because they're going to flame out real fast, especially when times are tough, which they will be at times. And they're going to be kind of up and down emotionally with the business, too attached perhaps to the business. So there's this healthy place that lives somewhere between passion and possession that we landed on, that is sort of this chip on your shoulder thing that you were talking about. How would you describe yourself in this context as we finish up this podcast?
Definitely a chip on my shoulder, but not in a bad way, in a good way. I always, I can be my own worst critic, and I always think there's better. Every time I do something, either if it's successful, failure, or somewhere in the middle, I always look back and say, how could I have done it differently? What could I have learned? If I had to do it again tomorrow, what would it be like? And I think when you're somebody that has that, where you go through something, give it your all, reflect, learn, and then move forward, you're always looking to make it a little bit better on the next thing you do. And that could be next week. That could be tomorrow. That could be anything. But I've always been on a path of growth and self-improvement. And that's one of the things that's really propelled me forward. I'm a lifelong learner, and I'm always looking to get better.
Yeah, that is for sure. Well, it's been fun to watch you and I grow together. You know, you've been a big part of my life the last 5 years for sure. And as I think forward the next 15 years or whatever, you know, I couldn't be more grateful for having you as a partner in my life in every regard. As we end, might you want to give some thank yous to Marissa and the kids? And I know you're a very good family man, exceptional husband and father. And I also know that the four of them have given greatly to the man you have become and the business that you built. Why don't we end there? What would you like to say to them?
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny. Earlier in the podcast, we talked about Steve, and when I met him, and I said, you know, I want to be this guy. Like, I want this guy's life. And, you know, fast forward 15 years, and I woke up in the beach with my family, my 3 kids. I think the same age and sex breakdown as Steve's kids, coincidentally. I've been married to Marissa for 10 years. We have 3 incredible children, Mia, Leonardo, and Grace. Like you said, they've been incredibly understanding and supportive. We have our time together. We value it. We love it. Ironically, Marissa is now an entrepreneur. Started her company during the pandemic, Corvino Design. She has a build and design firm, had incredible early successes, big publications. And, you know, I obviously support her as much as she allows me to. Something about Marissa is that we found out we were both Enneagram 8s. You might have been there at the time, and we're a reason behind that. And what that means is that we're both strong personalities.
We call them crazy 8s, Frankie.
Crazy 8s, man. And now, you know, I remember when she told me, I was like, "Oh, are you sure you filled it out right?" I was so like scared. But now it's good because now we know how to kind of work together and know what makes each other tick and know what makes each other upset. But, you know, couldn't be luckier to have the family and the support that I have.
Well, you'll probably see your mom this weekend. You can love on her for all of us and thank her for making lemonade out of lemons as far as your childhood and getting you on your way. Thank you, Frank, for taking such a long amount of time to share the depths of your journey. And as we shared early in the podcast, we knew this was going to be long. You and I don't do small talk very often. It's always kind of big talk. And I knew this was going to take a while, and God bless that it did. I think, you know, a lot of founders out there are going to be inspired by your journey, and also maybe inspired to be really picky with their equity partner. And to set as high a standards for them as themselves and their teams. Thank you, Frank. And I can't wait to see you. I think I get to see you in a week. So please give my best to your family.
All right, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me.
Take care.